I should have seen it coming. Life was too perfect, especially in that moment. It was a Friday night on a beautiful summer day. My beer was ice cold as it slid down my throat. The Cubs were beating the Cardinals on the big screen by a score of 7-2. In the fifth inning, my faithful German Shepherd Rice lay curled up next to me and mostly asleep, waking up and opening her eyes only when I let out a cheer for the Cubs' success. Except for the TV and my occasional shouts of joy, the house was quiet. My wife Tracy was visiting a neighbor, and my 18-year-old son and 17-year-old daughter had both spent the night visiting friends. It was just me in the dog cabins and a box of Corona in the fridge. Oh yes, and limes. I didn't mess around with limes much, but I bought a couple this afternoon when I knew I'd be alone tonight. Feels good. I heard the front door open and close and assumed it was my wife returning from a visit to her longtime friend Lisa. I heard her moving around the front of the house, but I didn't hear her call out a greeting as she usually did. It seemed a little odd to me, but just then, Cubs manager David Ross brought out his starting pitcher in the fourth inning when the Cubs had a big lead, causing me to explode with anger and once again wake the dog. It must have been at least 5 minutes before Tracy finally made it to the living room. She looked pensive and probably nervous. She didn't walk over to my chair and lean in for a kiss like she usually did, but instead sat down on the edge of the couch to the left of my chair. I watched her with one eye while the other followed the game. "Can we talk for a minute, Bob?" she asked in a voice I could barely hear over the noise of the TV. By now she had my full attention. Sure, I answered. I noticed that her forehead was dripping with sweat, and she seemed to be breathing erratically. I wondered if someone we knew was sick or dead. "Can you turn off the TV, Bob?" she asked, clenching and unclenching her fists. Turn off the TV in the middle of a Cubs game? She knew what she was asking. It had to be something serious, death, not illness. I got an uncomfortable feeling in my lower abdomen. I grabbed the remote and turned off the sound. "What's wrong, baby? You don't look so good. Did somebody die?" "Oh God, no, no one died," she answered quickly. "It's just really important to me, and I need to make sure you're listening to me completely." I nodded without saying anything. A traffic jam of bad thoughts formed in my brain. We sat staring at each other for at least half a minute. There was fear and something else in her eyes. Maybe anger. "You know that I love you completely and I would never cheat on you. I would never go behind your back and date another man, would I?" That wasn't exactly the question I was expecting. Suddenly, the dinner I had eaten earlier in the evening and the 2 glasses of beer I'd had during the game seemed to want to come back right there on the living room floor. I nodded silently again. "I'm 45 years old, Bob. I've only slept with one man in my entire life besides you," she began. "I'm still an attractive woman. My friends even say I'm a hot mommy. I want to sleep with another man just once so I can feel the thrill of meeting a new man, another man one more time before you and I grow old together. What the hell is this?" I sat still. I don't know how long it sounded like a speeding train passing right by my ears. No, absolutely not," I shouted back, jumping up from my chair. "It's not going to happen while I'm breathing." She stared at me wide-eyed as I paced back and forth. It must have been a bad dream. I must have fallen asleep in my chair and found myself in the middle of a nightmare. This has nothing to do with you and me. "Bob, it's all about me, my needs as a woman above everything else about you and our family," she said, and her voice seemed to grow stronger and more confident as she spoke. "I think I've been a pretty good wife and mother all these years. I always put family first. I need to do something for myself this time. I need to do it to feel like a sexy woman in control of her life. Don't you feel like a sexy woman with me?" I asked, realizing I sounded like a whiny loser. "I tell you I love you all the time. I think I show you that you are a sexy woman all the time. I still desire you, and I'm pretty sure I don't hide it too much. You do, and I like it, but it's about something else. My ego still needs validation by men other than you, Bob. It's nice to be noticed by other men. It's wonderful to think another man would want me that way. Doesn't it feel good when you see a woman looking at you or flirting with you? I'm no different. From anyone else, I like to be looked at with desire, and after all this time, I want more. I'd like to experience going on a date, getting drunk on wine and dinner, so to speak, and then another man picks you up and then desires you just for one night, not love, just desire one night. Then I'd come home to you and be a simple wife and mother for the rest of my life. You're anything but a simple wife and mother to me." "Blondie," I objected, "you're everything to me. I can't let you go to another man. I won't let you go to another man. You keep telling me you love me. Why don't you show me how much you love me by giving me this? I know it's a big ask, the biggest, and it would be the greatest gift to me if you would let me, she declared. No, it would be the greatest folly of me to let you. If you really loved me, you wouldn't even ask. I said, have I not been a good wife to you and a good mother to our children? Shouldn't that entitle me to a free ride? You had a lot more women than I had men before we were married. I'm just trying to even the score a little bit. She said, in fact, we never really discussed numbers before we got married. All we really discussed was how we both believed in fidelity after we got married. And for your information, I've only slept with 4 women in my life, including you, not exactly a long list. I said, oh, I always thought so. You have a lot more experience than I do. She said, you know a lot more than I do. I read a lot on the subject. I want to give you as much pleasure as possible, so it's still difficult for you to say yes, she asked. Not only is it an emphatic no, but I'm meeting with a lawyer first thing Monday morning to start the divorce proceedings, I said, as the shock reflected on her face. But she stammered, I understand how hard it must have been for you to ask for a pass, so this tells me that you're really serious about this. It tells me that you're not going to let it go that easily. I said it means that you're going to end up going behind my back to get your way. I don't believe you won't do it anymore unless you've already done it, and it was just a smokescreen to get an ex post fact authorization. No, I swear to you that I haven't slept with anyone up until now. I said I wouldn't cheat on you, and I meant it. She whimpered. But you would think that now that I know you want it, doing it now wouldn't be cheating, I said, looking straight at her. Her inability to hold my gaze told me everything I needed to know. You want to destroy our family even though I haven't done anything yet? She asked hoarsely if you've finally gotten up the courage to ask. It means you've been planning this for a long time, and that tells me that you've already picked a target. He probably had a part in planning this too. Lunches, dinners. You've already cheated on me, at least emotionally. Who is he, by the way? I asked. I didn't pick anyone in particular, she said, staring at a point on the wall over my shoulder. The silence lasted about 15 seconds. While I drilled a hole in her with my gaze, she turned bright red as she looked up at me and realized I was looking at her with disbelief on my face. You don't need to know, Bob, she said. Quietly, you're right, I don't need to know, but I do want to know the name of the man who was destroying what I thought was a beautiful marriage. You can tell me, or I can call all your close friends and your boss and all your co-workers and ask them. I said, her mouth dropped open in shock. You wouldn't. She started to say I wouldn't. What do I have to lose? My life is in the gutter and my marriage has fallen apart. What should I be embarrassed about? What about my embarrassment? She shrieked. I shrugged and tried my best to hide a smile. Name, I asked sharply. Dan Wilson, she said quietly. Please, Bob, don't hurt him. I'm not guaranteeing anything. I grabbed the remote and turned the game back on. She hummed, brushed away her tears, got up off the couch, and went upstairs to our bedroom. My eyes watched the rest of the Cubs game, but nothing registered in my brain. I can't even tell you what appeared on the screen after the game, but I know I sat in front of the TV for at least another 2 hours. While I think I did a pretty good job hiding most of my feelings from my wife, I was actually devastated. I had no idea that my wife was planning to sleep with another man. In retrospect, I suppose I should have noticed signs of her dissatisfaction with me or her life or something else over the past 3 months. Tracy had become somewhat aloof, not only from me, but also from our children. In fact, my daughter Sherry was the first to notice this, asking me if Tracy and I were having a fight. I noticed that the intimacy between us had also decreased. Sex 2 or 3 times a week had dwindled to once every 2 weeks. And not because I wasn't trying, I wondered if there were some early changes going on with her. Then there were the phone calls that were taken outside the room, which almost never happened until recently, in addition to the almost constant evening text messages when I asked about it. She claimed it was Lisa who was having problems with her husband, Jerry. This was more than interesting because Jerry and Lisa lived just 3 houses down from us, and I had no idea they were having any problems. I spent the rest of the weekend intensely considering my options. I told Tracy that I was going to file for divorce as soon as possible, but first, I needed to examine every aspect of this. My marriage and my family. I could certainly understand how another man could feel desire for my Tracy. She was a beauty when I met her when we were both 21, and at 45 she was only 5 pounds heavier despite having 2 children. Her good-sized boobs matched her firm ass, and her face made her look more like a 35-year-old. I always wondered how it was that I came to know Tracy. She was clearly above my pay grade. Not that I'm a troll or anything, I'm decent looking, but guys who look like me don't often meet the prom queen she was just 3 years ago. As a senior in high school and junior high, we both took the same astronomy class at Purdue University. I took it just for fun, while Tracy needed the course to fulfill her science requirements. In that sense, I am somewhat of a nerd, and Tracy realized pretty quickly that I would be happy to help her pass the exam since science was not her strong suit. It was nearing the end of the first semester, and we were studying in my dorm room when Tracy leaned over to me and kissed me hard on the lips. I kissed her back just as hard. Damn it, for most of the semester I thought you were gay. Tracy told me when we broke the kiss, no matter what outfit I wore, you never seemed interested. I was interested, but I wouldn't have thought it was mutual. I was just trying my best not to drool in front of you. I said we were exceptional right away. I didn't have much sexual experience, but I assumed she had even less because she never complained and seemed quite happy with everything I tried in bed, thanks to my insatiable reading on the subject. While all the other guys my age were watching adult movies, I was reading about the action that everyone was watching with Tracy. It came in handy right from the start. When she opened her eyes 2 minutes later, all she could mutter was, "I love you, Bob." We were married 2 years after graduation. 3 years later, our son came along, followed by a daughter financially. We were living pretty well as I was an IT professional and she was working in a bank when she went back to work shortly after our youngest went to school. Our son was getting ready to enter Ohio State University as a freshman in a couple months, and our daughter was about to move on to high school in 2 short years. We were going to be orphans. We had spent the last few months discussing plans for our future, including traveling. I had loved this woman for almost 23 years. On the one hand, giving it up because she asked permission to cheat seemed overly harsh. But on the other hand, I had already noted that the fact that she went to the point of asking for permission to cheat was a serious problem. I wasn't born yesterday. I knew that if she was so desperate to ask to be allowed to cheat, she would be desperate enough to go behind my back, especially since she had already told me about it and didn't see it as cheating, although I did. Of course, there was also the issue that she and Dan Wilson were already having an emotional affair, and they were planning this night of physical infidelity together. Would I ever be able to forgive that I called my divorce attorney first thing Monday morning and made an appointment for Thursday afternoon? Meanwhile, on the home front, Tracy was trying her best to convince not to file for divorce. "We haven't done anything, Bob. We're not going to do anything," Tracy cried. "Because you don't want a divorce or because you know it's wrong?" I asked. She didn't look at me and didn't answer. "You're still hoping I'll change my mind and let you aren't?" This elicited a hopeful look from her, which unfortunately sealed our fates. I sent Tracy to court a week after meeting with my attorney. We lived in an affluent state and made about the same amount of money, so finances were easy. The kids were barely home, so housing issues were worked out as we went along, and the non-custodial parent was responsible for child support. For 1 year, we would sell the house and split the proceeds. Boom, the case is done. 21 years is over. Not so fast. Tracy hired a pretty savvy attorney who convinced the judge to order 4 sessions of counseling and more if she deemed it necessary. The counselor, a woman in her mid-30s, was of the same opinion as my children and Tracy. Since my wife had not actually committed adultery, why did I feel that divorce was my only option? I told the counselor the same thing I told Tracy and my children, that I considered her request to have sex outside of our marriage tantamount to breaking our vows. Because of that, I no longer trusted her as a marriage partner. I may still love her to some degree, but I couldn't stay married to a woman I couldn't trust. But I'll never try something like that again. "Bob, I don't want anyone but you, please," she begged over and over again for the better part of 2 sessions. "You'll never change your mind, will you?" "Mr. Rasmussen, I can see it in your eyes," the counselor said near the end of the 2nd session. "I'm going to put an end to this farce and tell the judge to grant the divorce unimpeded. My personal opinion doesn't matter. But I'm going to give it to you anyway. I think you're making a huge mistake. Your wife didn't cheat on you, at least not physically. So it sounds like you'd like to get marriage counseling to keep your marriage together for the long haul. Your wife seems willing to make any concessions you want to make to save your marriage and your family." I know I wrinkled my nose and sighed. I loved Tracy to death. I made that decision without flipping a coin. There's a difference between the way you and I look at things. Dr. Baker, you called it a concession. I don't think her Pledge of Allegiance is a concession. I think it's called honoring the wedding vows she made to me 21 years ago that she planned to break with another man. I explained my in-laws on my wife's side practically had a stroke when Tracy told them about the divorce. My mother-in-law called me the next day and shouted insults for a good 15 minutes. Taking only one breath during the entire denunciation, she started yelling right after I said hello. My father-in-law, who has always been a more rational person, took the phone away from her while she was still screaming. She didn't even cheat on you, and you divorce her after 21 years. Are you out of your mind, Bob? He yelled. I gave him my version of what had happened, and I could hear him making quiet, strangled noises as I told him every now and then he would quietly utter, really, and then I would continue at the end of the conversation. He seemed much more depressed in spirit. Finally, he said, "Sorry, Bob," and quietly hung up the Next week, I moved into a neighboring two-bedroom apartment my daughter had decided to live in the house with my wife for the next year until she went to college. But I thought the second room would come in handy. If either of the kids wanted to stay for a while, they were both upset with me. Although they seemed to understand why I was divorcing their mother, I had a friendly phone conversation with my neighbor Jerry. A few days after I moved into my apartment, I informed him that his wife, Lisa, had a hand in my wife's plans with Dan Wilson, and that Tracy claimed that he and Lisa were having marital problems. I told him that didn't think he had anything to do with the breakup of my marriage, but that his wife was somehow involved, and given how close she and Tracy were, was Lisa looking for a young stud too. Oh, Jerry wheezed through the phone, so you're telling me I could get in trouble too. Is your lawyer giving out group rates? The social media phenomenon has both positive and negative aspects for me. The positive side was getting all sorts of information about a certain Dan Wilson without even having to hire a private investigator saved me a lot of money. Wilson was a co-worker of Lisa and had transferred to the local office from Cleveland about 6 months before my marriage broke up. He had a very pretty fiancée who was still looking for a job in our town, so he came home almost every weekend to see her. Apparently, he was trying to arrange something with my wife for the time he was in town so he could have a warm welcoming in both places. I wondered if Tracy even knew about the guy's fiancée. Now all was lost except for the phone call I made to Wilson's fiancée. Shortly thereafter, I heard from some sources that Dan's wedding had been canceled and his fiancée said he could spend full time with his old lady. Did I mention that his fiancée was the daughter of a very wealthy man 2 weeks before the divorce was finalized? It was the 22nd anniversary of his marriage to Tracy. I had to admit that I was hurting inside because of what I had lost. But the longer I sat in front of dinner at Swanson TV, the more I realized I was doing the right thing. I would have spent the rest of my life looking for evidence that she was cheating on me if I had stayed married. I knew with every fiber of my being that sooner or later she would find a way to cheat on me. She hated losing at anything and viewed not getting her way as a loss that needed to be rectified. I had a shot of single malt whiskey and was in bed by 10 p.m. Happy anniversary to me. My phone rang around 1 a.m. and I noticed it was my soon-to-be ex-wife. I thought about switching it to voicemail. But since I was already awake, I answered the call. Oh, hell yes. She wailed, obviously in the throes of finishing. I'd heard those sounds often enough to know she wasn't faking it. There was another unintelligible squeal before Tracy urged her partner, presumably Wilson, to her harder. I should have ended the conversation immediately, but I froze in place. I listened for another 2 minutes, long enough to hear Tracy's lover growl with his own discharge. Then I hung up before they started sing to each other after sex, wishing I was on the landline so she could hear me tossing the receiver. If I had even the slightest doubt that I was doing the right thing, it would have decided our fate on the advice of my attorney. I made it a habit to record every conversation I had with my wife as I sat there feeling like my blood pressure was about to skyrocket. I dialed my in-law's number, and when my father-in-law confirmed his presence, I pressed play on my phone's recording app. I let it play for a full 3 minutes, then ended the call. I was pretty sure this little one-act play would not be repeated in the future, unlike my wife. I didn't use the charms of others until the divorce became official, and even then I hadn't gotten a woman into bed in over a year. I admit that I had difficulties in my social life. It's been 24 years since I last went on a date. And since I never planned to date again, I didn't keep track of dating events, silly me. It turned out to be a failed strategy because the dating world certainly blew past me like a freight train on speed. I knew that part of my Reluctance to date was in my head. I was afraid of being caught off guard again. I loved Tracy, and I had never anticipated what would happen to me, not even a hint. The one thing that was easy to see that had changed since the last time I dated was the attitudes of women when I dated. It was one-sided. A man picked a target, the man asked, said target out on a date. If said target said yes, the man picked an activity and paid for everything. These days, women seem to be the hunter almost half the time, or at least thinking about how the date should go. Sometimes they even paid for everything. There were moments when I felt like a dinosaur trying to chase a cheetah. The dating scene showed me that Tracy's sudden selfishness was not unicorn behavior. Along with feeling more powerful, today's dating women are definitely more self-centered. Many of them wanted their own, even to the detriment of their partners. If it was good for them, it was good for their partners and their significant others. Been there, done that. And it's all very recent. I'm not going to complain about the physical aspects of having sex with a woman in her 20s. Okay, the first few times women nearly killed me, I was pretty sure I pulled a muscle. However, once I got used to the physical intimacy, the pleasure level was off the charts. I'm not saying Tracy wasn't good in bed, but in her 45, she didn't have the energy and flexibility of a 20-year-old girl. Of course, I didn't have the regenerative powers of a 20-year-old man either. But my tongue and finger ability served me well while my partner and I waited for my tool to recover. It wasn't just about younger women, though I've dated and slept with women from about 25 to 55. I guess you could call me an equal opportunity enthusiast. However, I always looked for women around my age first, so to speak, in my comfort zone. It had been a rough week, and after finishing a meeting with a new client across town, I walked into the bar of an upscale hotel, still dressed in my suit. I sat down on a high stool at the bar and ordered a serving of Glenmorangie single malt. It was about 7:00 p.m. when I walked in, and about an hour later, a group of women from the bachelorette party were seated at tables marked reserved. There must have been about 15 of them, and they were all acting pretty rowdy. I decided to stick around for a bit and watch the fun, so I ordered food from the bar. The bride-to-be was, of course, the star of the show. And I noticed that she was a pretty girl of about 25 with light brown hair down to her waist and big brown eyes. I admit I'm a fan of long hair, so she kind of grabbed me and I focused on her for a few minutes before I started paying attention to the other partygoers. That's when I noticed her. I assumed she was in her early 40s, and I could tell from her age that she was the companion for the evening, an older hen who was taken along to look after the innocent and not so innocent younger chicks. The first thing I noticed was that she seemed a little nervous in her mid-thigh length black skirt, which seemed to scoot a little higher on her legs. As she sat in the chair several times during the first few minutes, she tried unsuccessfully to pull her skirt down. I smiled to myself. She really did have nice legs. She also seemed to have impressive breasts, not quite hidden under the tight lavender-colored silk blouse she was wearing. The blouse had a V neckline, with the neckline reaching down to the middle of her large breasts and showing that her alabaster skin wasn't often exposed to the sun. When she wasn't worrying about the length of her skirt, she was looking down at her breasts, I assumed, to make sure there wasn't too much creamy skin showing. Her whole outfit was probably a bit youthful. For her comfort, and I assumed it had been sewn for her by one of the younger women in the group I mentally complimented, whoever had picked it out and convinced her to wear it. The women definitely seemed to be enjoying themselves, laughing, drinking, and eating, and when the three-piece combination played, several women got up and started dancing with each other. The women dancing together seemed to encourage the other men at the bar, who started approaching the women on the dance floor and those sitting at the table, with the exception of their companion. I waited for about 10 minutes, and when no one moved toward the companion, I decided the way was clear and headed toward her. She had shoulder-length dark brown hair and bright green eyes that reminded me of Jacqueline BCE in her heyday. Just as importantly, she wasn't wearing a wedding ring. She flushed a gorgeous pink blush when I asked her to dance. She hesitated at first, but then agreed, and several young women sitting nearby expressed their sorrow for her as she stood up, pulled down her skirt, and took my hand. The first two dances were fast, and I had to silently thank my ex-wife for insisting that I learn to dance. The next dance was slow, and I was a little surprised when she pressed her lush body against me. Her hair smelled like white lies, and I chuckled to myself because that perfume wasn't too popular with young women. We actually talked for a bit. As we glided across the dance floor, I learned that her name was Kathleen Franks. She was the bride's aunt, and the band's chaperone. She thanked me for dancing and started to leave the dance floor after a slow dance, but I took her hand and invited her to join me at the bar. She started to protest that she needed to keep an eye on her girls, but I pointed out to her that she could see them just fine from my seat at the bar. We watched the young women and talked. I learned that she was actually 48 years old and divorced after 15 years of marriage. She told me that her husband, a man of means, had traded her for a trophy wife who was 27 against his 48 when he married her 3 years ago. She also told me that her outfit had been chosen for her by her niece, the bride, and that she felt it was a bit youthful for her as she usually dressed more conservatively. I expressed my opinion that her outfit suited her perfectly, and I was completely giddy when I told her that I absolutely loved her sexy heels. I learned years ago that women seem to really like it when their shoes are praised. "Don't you think I look inappropriate in this outfit?" she asked innocently. "Not in the slightest, I'm sorry to say this, but you look good enough to eat you up if I liked the pink blush before now. I like the dark red blush," she demonstrated. We talked for about 15 minutes. She noticed that I wasn't wearing a wedding ring and wanted to know the story. She expressed surprise when I told her that my ex-wife had never actually cheated on me physically. I'm really old-fashioned. I explained she had cheated on me emotionally and planned to do it physically. I couldn't trust her anymore. You don't tell someone you love them, but you want to have sex with someone else. I understand that she replied, everyone should have a line in the sand. After a few minutes, she went back to the bridal table, but was more than receptive when I asked her to dance again about 30 minutes later this time. When we were done, she took my hand and led me back to the table with the other women, which now had several other men at it. From my point of view, the evening was a success, even though the young women were a bit rowdy. I was very surprised when Kathy invited me to be her date to her wedding in 2 weeks. I was going to go alone, but I know I'd rather spend time with you. I know we just met, but you've already met a lot of girls who will be there too. She said, besides, you'd be doing me a big favor because I wouldn't be there alone and I wouldn't look really pathetic. I certainly wouldn't want you to look pathetic. I'd be more than happy to accompany you to the wedding. I said, tell me what color you'll be wearing, and I'll pick out the suit I have that goes best with it. She leaned toward me and gave me a quick peck on the lips. Ooh, la la la, came a chorus from across the table. I smiled radiantly, while Katie blushed again. I could get used to this. I sat with Kathy when we weren't dancing during one of those moments when we were sitting at the table. I kept my eyes on the girls at the bachelorette party, some of whom were clearly overindulging in alcohol. I'm the father of a teenage girl, so it wasn't unusual for me to be in dad mode with the young women around me when I saw a young man take one of the girls by the arm and begin to lead her toward the restrooms. I excused myself, got up from the table, and quickly and quietly made my way toward them. Reaching them just before the guy was about to push the girl into the men's room, the young man looked at me with disdain, obviously not intimidated by the older guy in the shirt and tie. I admit that I'll never scare anyone at first sight, but I'd like to think that I'm still in good physical shape, and I got into quite a bit of trouble as a kid. Sometimes you have to be willing to do some violence to do the right thing, which in this case meant protecting some young girl from becoming this guy's sex toy. I would hope that someone would step in and protect my little girl if the situation called for it. Let go of my hand and get away from me, old man. He growled at me. She's old enough to play if she wants to. I let go of his hand, but with my other hand, I grabbed his head and slammed it hard against the wall on the side of the door. I pushed him hard enough to break the drywall, smashing his face bloody and stunning him. Suddenly, he stopped seeming so cocky and let go of the girl. He also seemed to no longer want this disagreement. The club became quiet as people realized what had just happened, just as I started to lead Alicia back to the bachelorette party. Katie and the rest of the group came over to us, grabbed the woman, and led her back to the table. I was left facing the restaurant manager and another employee. I thought I was in trouble until the manager reached out to me and thanked me for helping the young woman. The police were called. This guy is going to jail. They will probably need your information and your side of the story, but I don't think you have anything to worry about. By the way, drinks for the rest of the evening are on the house. Thanks again. He said, wow, that was some crazy Wanda. The bride-to-be said as I walked back to the table. Thank you for paying attention, not just Aunt Kathy. How did you see that? Katie asked me. I was supposed to be the chaperone, and I had no idea what was going on. I feel pretty awkward about it. It's not your fault. It's easy to lose sight of 14 girls in a bar unless you're a professional security guard or a father. Fathers, at least most of us, have what I call fatherly vision. I chatted and snacked with the women at the table until they decided to leave and spend the rest of the evening somewhere else. I kissed Katie gently on the lips as we said goodnight to each other, feeling pretty good and having her number in my phone. Get a room, one of the girls said to the husky laughter of the group. I licked my lips gently and tasted Katie's lipstick as I watched the women leave the restaurant. I carried my drink back to the seat at the bar I had occupied earlier. Looks like you did pretty well. The bartender grinned as I sat back down. Who knew? I replied with a laugh. Girls' night out, give me one for the road so I can celebrate my good fortune before I go. My new best friend, bartender Sean, earned himself a double shot of whiskey as a tip for the evening. Katie's dress for the wedding was light blue, so I wore my navy blue pinstripe suit, which I consider my in-room for myself suit. I thought we made a beautiful couple, as did several of her relatives at the wedding. Several people came up to me at the wedding and thanked me for looking out for Alicia. Apparently, the bride had spent the previous 2 weeks telling anyone who would agree to listen that I was some sort of hero, heroic and handsome. What a wonderful combination, said Kathy's sister, Donna Fulham, the bride's mother, as she came over to introduce herself to me before the wedding. Thank you for helping the girls a couple weeks ago, and for making my sister look like she has improved taste in men. I also got to meet Katie's 24-year-old daughter, Marissa, and her fiancé, Ben. Well, at least one of my parents isn't begging for dates, elementary school Marissa said. Upon meeting me, Dad's sure to hate you if you stick around long enough to be introduced by the time the reception was over. I knew Katie and I would go the distance a month later. I introduced her to my children. My son quickly bonded with her, and my daughter was a little reserved. She was still a little angry at me for divorcing her mother, even though Mom didn't even cheat on you. However, my son understood that he had a serious girlfriend. And one evening, we had an in-depth discussion about fidelity and what it meant to each of us. Epilogue, my wife Kathy and I retired a few years ago. We celebrated our anniversary with an Alaskan cruise with a daily dose of Callus and Astroglide. We make love every morning before we shower and get on with our lives. At our age, it's more about connecting than sex. All 3 of our children are married and thriving. We have a total of 6 grandchildren. I've only talked to my ex-wife maybe a couple dozen times since our divorce, counting our children's wedding and Christmas vacations. She was married and divorced for the 2nd time. My kids tell me she blames me for her life being the way it is. I never really cheated on him. She still tells them some people just don't get it.